Darth Maul was a young Zabrak human adult male born on Eridonia 54 years before the Battle of Yavin. As an infant, Maul was given to Darth Sidious by the Darthmerian Night Sisters, who would eventually train him in the dark side of the Force. However, Maul would not get a full Sith training, and instead was trained more as an assassin for Darth Sidious and Darth Plagueis. As an adult, Maul will become an accomplished duelist in lightsaber combat and hand-to-hand combat. But again, he would never exhibit any high-level Sith abilities such as Force Lightning. However, his species was highly resistant to pain, and he had the ability to resist most Force Lightning attacks. It wasn't until Sidious killed Plagueis the Wise that Maul became a Sith Lord. Eventually, Maul would be the first Sith to expose himself after a millennia, fighting against Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn, though he would be defeated by the former. He would return again during the Clone Wars, participating in several skirmishes on the Outer Rim with his brother Savage Opress. However, his reign would be short-lived, as his former master Darth Sidious would make short work of his brother and defeat him as well. Still, Maul was possibly one of the most refined martial artists of his time. Darth Malgus, birth name Veradun, was a middle-aged human male born on the Sith world Dramon Kos, 3,700 years before the Battle of Yavin. Darth Malgus was born into the Sith Empire. His adoptive father saw the dark side in him early on after he killed one of his servants, simply because he could. Shortly after, Malgus was sent to the Sith Academy where he would be trained. It is vague who Malgus learned under while at the Academy, but if it was anything like the norm of his time, he would have been taught by several Sith Lords throughout the Academy. Sometime after his training at the Academy, he would be under the direct apprenticeship to his master Vindican. As an adult, Malgus went up the ranks of the Sith quickly, eventually killing his master after Vindican was defeated by the Jedi Khao Sin Jarach. Over the course of his time during the Great Galactic War, he would become mutilated and disfigured, held together only by his Sith powers and his cybernetic suit, but he still held his own as one of the greatest powerhouses of his time. As with all my videos, I will be pitting these two in their primes. For Darth Maul, this would be his time during the Clone Wars before Sidious ended his reign. For Darth Malgus, his prime would be after his victory over Lord Aldras, after the Sith occupation of Coruscant. Darth Maul stood over 2 meters tall with his cybernetic legs and was extremely resistant to pain. His Zabrak blood would afford him a high pain resistance, and his human half would afford him resiliency. Those two attributes, coupled with his grueling training under Darth Sidious, would groom him into a hardened beast. Initially, he would be trained by the droid TD-D9, which was programmed to brutally punish Maul after his failings. Eventually, when Maul turned 10 years old, Sidious would send him to the Orsis Academy, telling the instructors he wanted him trained as a bodyguard. This would give Maul impeccable training in regards to his martial arts skill, especially due to the fact that Sidious instructed him specifically not to use the Force during his time there. Darth Sidious would put Maul through more cruel training scenarios, including, but not limited to, dunking Maul in freezing water, tying Maul up by his ankles for hours on end, and battling scores of assassin droids alone. Eventually, Sidious would deem him worthy as a Sith Lord, but without much Sith training. Darth Maul was molded as a Sith assassin more than he was a Sith apprentice. Nevertheless, his training and biology afforded him ridiculous amounts of resiliency. He could withstand not only standard physical strikes, but he was also been noted to resist the effects of Force Lightning, as evidenced by his fight with the Night Sister Miguela. Most of all, Maul was a master of the Teras Kasi discipline, something he would learn from his time at the Orsis Academy when he was not allowed to use the Force. Practitioners of Teräs Käsi were adept at hand-to-hand combat, enabling astounding use of speed in their strikes. Not only were the users of this form formidable in their offense, but they were trained with defense in mind as well. Users would train to anticipate their strikes from their opponent, slipping and dodging. They were also trained to close their minds to force sensitives, protecting themselves against mental attacks. Initially, the Teräs Käsi fighting style was developed for non-Force users to combat against Jedi and Sith alike. If Maul could master this fighting style and be a Force sensitive at the same time, it would enable him an astounding skill with it. During the Clone Wars, few could match Darth Maul's martial prowess, a product decades in the making through cruel training and punishment. Standing at over 2 meters tall, Darth Malgus was a human tank, in strength and in stature. He was a stocky opponent, especially in his later days, as he would wear a large cybernetic suit. Though Malgus is never shown in any hand-to-hand combat with his opponents, there are several examples of his unarmed strength. In his novel Deceived, he is described as crushing a Jedi's throat with his bare hands, and later killed Lord Audros with his bare hands as well. He may not have been a refined hand-to-hand fighter, but he made up for it with his brawler-style might. In terms of his resiliency, we have seen him withstanding a tackle from a Republic trooper, resisting rockets, waving off grenades, and surviving an avalanche of rocks. In short, he was a rhino. His strength and resolve would also serve him well during the sacking of the Jedi Temple when he fought Master Vin Zalo. At one point in the fight, he would get hit across his face. The force of Zalo's strike was so strong, it dislodged his respirator and loosened one of his teeth. But still, Malgus was able to take the pain and even feint that it hurt him more than it did, which would eventually lead him to a victory against Zalo. However, he was held together by a cybernetic suit to stabilize his breathing and failing lungs, which would be a slight disadvantage in a fight. If one managed to use his suit against him by breaking apart his respirator or disabling it, they may gain an advantage. However, no one that has fought Malgus ever seemed to use his suit against him. Still, if someone did manage to disable his suit, it was not a deal breaker, as he is shown to be capable of breathing without the mask for a time. Both Darth Maul and Darth Malgus were bred for combat. From an early age, Maul was trained alongside non-Force users, enhancing his natural ability. Malgus too was trained early on in the Sith Academy, enhancing his skills as well. They were both extremely robust and resilient fighters. No one could simply pound through their defenses. Only the finality of a decapitation could end their locomotion. Their stamina was probably equal, as Maul was trained heavily in his endurance. We can assume too that Malgus could endure as well, especially after his injuries on Alderaan. The difference that lies between the two is their abilities in hand-to-hand exchanges. While Malgus was a brawler, leveraging his strength against his foes, Maul was a trained assassin in Teräs Käsi. The greatest aspect of this ability was that it was specifically designed for non-Force users. In the hands of a Force user like Maul, it would become even more deadly. Therefore, I give the slight edge to Darth Maul in regards to his physical ability. As stated before, Darth Maul's greatest power did not come from his knowledge of the Force. He was much more inclined to punch or kick his opponent than Force push him. That being said, he does have some skill with telekinesis, specifically with Force push, grip, and choke, though he was never reliant on his abilities in this regard. His most notable use of the Force would possibly be his Force Wall, able to resist Force Lightning, though this could be more due to his physical resiliency and less on his Force Wall. Maul was able to retain his life through the dark side of the Force, even after being cut in half. His survival stemmed from his rage against Obi-Wan Kenobi, wanting to face him again to redeem his failure on Naboo. Yet, being able to survive mortal wounds does not a victor make. It wasn't the fact that he was able to survive his injuries, but that his pain threshold was so high. Thus, physical strikes or blowbacks from the Force would not do him in. Only a decapitation or a stab through the heart could take Maul down for the count. However, his standard Force abilities would seem to have been honed by the time of the Clone Wars. He would utilize a powerful Force push against Kenobi, as well as choking a Falleen without even looking at him. In desperation, he was even able to pull an entire shuttle down from a cliff. This is an astounding feat, yes, but I do not think it was in the realm of Darth Maul's usual Force abilities. Instead, it was his heightened state of mind through desperation which afforded him this power. Even so, Maul was very particular about his use of the Force, often using it as an afterthought rather than his go-to. Instead, he willed himself over his opponents through focused martial arts skill over his mystical skill. Malgus was very strong on the dark side of the Force. He was able to implement a variety of standard and Sith abilities, such as Force Push, Choke, Speed, and Lightning. He was so powerful in his Force Push, he could even break through Force walls of his opponents, breaking bone. Even with his varied skill set, he was able to chain them together effortlessly in his lightsaber moveset. He was also very talented in retaining his life through the dark side. After his fight with Master Jedi Satil Shan, he was smothered by an avalanche of rocks. Even though he was nearly crippled, his lungs were failing, and his breathing was uneasy, he was able to take on two very capable Jedi Knights and defeat them without feeling any pain. Malgus' Force Lightning was powerful, but inconsistent. During the sacking of the Jedi Temple, he was able to kill 3 Jedi with it, but he was not able to kill a charging Republic trooper, though this may be because of the trooper's armor and his relative inexperience with the power at the time. After the sacking of the Jedi Temple, he was able to use it with great effect against Auryn Lanier, shocking her into unconsciousness, and Lord Aldros frying his smooth skin to a crisp. One of his favorite abilities was Force Augmentation to enhance his physical movements, which enabled him the ability to keep up with the much faster Jedi he would face during the war. He also showcased a sixth sense in the Force, knowing when a death blow was coming to him. This will be evidenced in his fight with Auryn Lanier, who attempted to use her second blade to stab through him. In an instant, he could sense the move and evade, even though he was focused on his offense. Though Auryn still hit him with her saber, she only managed to graze his armor instead of penetrating it through. In the book Deceive, we see an example of Malgus' power and rage with the dark side of the Force after the Sith occupation of Coruscant, and more notably, after the death of his lover, Alina. Thinking of Alina blew oxygen on the embers of his anger. In life, Alina had been his weakness, a tool to be exploited by his rivals. In death, she had become his strength, her memory, the lens of his rage. The book goes on to describe his grasp of the Force further in his fight with Lord Aldros. Malgus felt the hate pouring off Aldros, the power, but it paled in comparison to the rage and hate rolling off Malgus. Because of the death of his lover Alina, especially at his own hand, he was able to break the chains her love held him in, unleashing a powerful beast within his depths. Nowhere else is he evidenced with such power with the dark side of the Force. During his assault on Aldros' estate, he would even describe himself as not just controlling the Force, but being the Force itself, a description most high-level Force users would attribute. It is very clear that Malgus is Maul's superior in regards to Force abilities. He applied it more regularly and fluently in his lightsaber sequences, and he was relatively powerful in his abilities. While I do not believe Malgus' Force Lightning could do too much to Maul if he did manage to hit him with it, his versatility with Force pushes and saber throws would be able to keep Maul off balance. Yes, Maul had become stronger in the Force during the Clone Wars, but he favored his physical abilities far more than anything else. Thus, I really see no other choice than to give Darth Malgus the decisive edge in his Force abilities. Darth Maul carried both a double-bladed and single-bladed lightsaber with a red synthesized crystal. In regards to this matchup, I'll be observing him with his single-bladed saber. When fighting someone one-to-one, Maul seemed to favor his single blade, as evidenced by his fight with Qui-Gon Jinn in Tatooine. Darth Sidious would train Maul as a Juyo specialist. Juyo, which was the 7th and final form of lightsaber combat, was a style that drew directly from the dark side and the practitioner's inner emotions. Though many Juyo users like Darth Vader or Ram Koda used Dun Mach in conjunction with the form, Maul only took from Juyo's physical aspects. During the Clone Wars, however, Maul would become a bit more refined, employing Dun Mach against Obi-Wan Kenobi. Darth Maul would also become proficient in his use of Niman. Again, unlike most users of Niman who train to use it in conjunction with Force abilities, Maul practiced it to further his training with dual blade fencing, employing the Jar Kai variant of Niman. And Maul probably had some knowledge of Ataru, as he often incorporated acrobatics within his fighting style. Not to mention, Maul had an astounding ability with Teräs Käsi, the hand-to-hand style designed for non-Force users, as previously discussed in Round 1 for physical abilities. His mastery of all these forms would enable him deadly speed, a speed complemented by even Darth Plagueis the Wise. Don't get me wrong though, Maul was not combat-centric in the way he fought. He also had some tactical ingenuity. When he could not outright beat someone through initial combat, his endurance enabled him to figure out another way to defeat them. In the Phantom Menace novelization, Qui-Gon would comment on Maul's skill and confidence. It was the Sith that was controlling the struggle, wheeling and spinning, leaping and somersaulting with astonishing ease. Their enemy was taking them with him, drawing them to a place of his own choosing. Still, in terms of his outright combat, he was a fantastic duelist, matching even Darth Sidious blow for blow, even at least for a few moments. Darth Malgus carried a hefty Sith lightsaber. Like all other Sith, he used a red synthesized crystal which had more cutting power than Jedi variants. His hilt was very large, and its guard had two very sharp edges for close cuts. Though Malgus' lightsaber form was never explicitly stated in any source, it can be inferred that he was a practitioner of the Jim-So form. Jim-So gave Malgus the ability to turn his defense into offense. Users of the form would often parry an attack and instantly counter with an even stronger attack. While Malgus had a lot of raw emotion, I would not go as far as to say that he was ever a practitioner of Juyo, because his fighting style was not as chaotic or unpredictable as that of other Juyo users. Instead, his strikes were very precise and extremely strong. Malgus' use of brute strength would be his main operative in a fight. He was able to defeat Cao Sin Durach with Jar Kai, even though Cao was extremely proficient with the form himself. It was Malgus' use of his overwhelming strength and heavy cleaves which enabled him victory. Nevertheless, he was not a mere freight train, attacking with a single motive. He also showcased a use of acrobatics, displaying some knowledge of Ataru, though his use of it was much more straightforward. In his fight with Jedi Master Vinzalo, he outwitted his opponent when he could not keep up with his strikes, as evidenced in the novel Deceived. Zalo slammed the hilt of his saber into the side of Malgus' jaw. A tooth dislodged, and his respirator was knocked askew. Malgus tasted blood, but he was too deep in the Force for the blow to do real damage. He staggered backward a step, as if the blow had stunned him. Seeing an opening, Zalo stepped forward and crosscut for Malgus' throat, as Malgus knew he would. Darth Malgus would go to invert his grip and stab Zalo through the gut, showcasing not only great strength and pain resistance, but also a use of tactical ingenuity. He turned his pain into an advantage. However, he was not infallible, as he seemed to take much issue with much faster opponents in the form of Satil Shan, Vin Salo, and Aaron Lanier. Though he was able to eventually beat out Shan and Zalo through his dueling abilities and tactical insight, his first encounter with Lanier would not go so well. During their fight, it would be described that his strength was being answered by her speed, as she easily sidestepped his strikes and countered with a flurry of her own blows. And in his duel with Zalo, he could not muster a counteroffensive against his speedy blade work, instead needing his feint to open Zalo up to a stab. In his second fight with Lanier, however, Malgus' greater use of the dark side would enable him a victory against another Jedi. These two adversaries were extremely prolific duelists of their time. Darth Maul was molded for combat through his rage, focusing on Teräs Käsi and Juyo. Darth Malgus was also bred for combat through his rage, focusing on brute strength and Jim So. The finite difference between the two was their combat experience. Darth Maul has experienced some notable kills in his lifetime, including Jedi Battlemaster Anun Bandara and Jedi Guardian Qui-Gon Jinn, both Jedi Masters noted by their skill with a lightsaber. However, Darth Malgus lived war. He was war. His one task was to fight, to destroy, always seen in a lightsaber duel throughout the war. He would also lasso a few notable kills of his own, including Battlemaster Kalsin Darach and Jedi High Counselor Vin Zalo. So we can see that they were both very capable against the best of the Jedi. Darth Maul utilizing his speed and endurance, Malgus using his strength and mobility. What we must look at then is how they managed to defeat their foes in specific terms. Maul simply outdueled Anun, who would eventually take his own life. But with Qui-Gon Jinn, he controlled their fight completely, utilizing his aggressive speed to work at Qui-Gon's endurance. Malgus defeated Darach by sheer strength, but with Vin Zalo he was able to outsmart him. So really there is no glaring advantage that either had against the other. It was Maul's speed against Malgus' strength. Any difference between the two would be marginal at best, but ultimately, I would have to deem both Darth Maul and Darth Malgus as equals in regards to their dueling abilities. The fight between Darth Maul and Darth Malgus will be an exhausting and long battle. They match each other physically in regards to resiliency and endurance. However, Darth Maul's mastery of Teräs Käsi gives him a slight edge over Malgus' brawling style. Even though Maul did have some skill in his use of combative force powers, his over-specialization in physical combat would hamper his efforts against Malgus' variety and power in the Force. And as lightsaber duelists, they were on par, defeating foes of similar caliber, though they managed victory by different means. Their battle would start off ferociously, both drawing on their immense internal rage. They would hammer through each other with everything they had. Maul would use his ability in Teräs Käsi to get in close on Malgus' defenses, landing powerful elbows, knees, and kicks, though none of his strikes would unseat Malgus. Malgus would allow Maul to get in close, feinting more pain than he had. When Maul got too close, he would slash him across the face with the sharp end of his hilt, sending Maul stumbling back. Seeing an advantage, Malgus would hit Maul with forced lightning. Maul would take the pain, reaching into his cruel training with Darth Sidious, enduring the torture the lightning brought. Eventually, he would bring his lightsaber overhead, using it to redirect the lightning back at Malgus, who would immediately stop using the power. They would re-engage again, clashing blades on one another. Maul's speed would be too much for Malgus. He would beat him back with quick strikes, too swift for Malgus to bring his Jim So to bear. unable to muster a counter-offensive. Becoming frustrated, Malgus would unleash a powerful force push, throwing Maul back into a wall. Unrelenting, Malgus would not miss a beat, implementing a saber throw against Maul. Using his speed, Maul would dodge the throw easily, but he would not expect the bottom of Malgus's boot on his face. Stunned, Maul would not see it coming. In only a matter of seconds, Malgus was able to counter with his extensive combat experience. He used his Force Rage to force push through Malgus's onslaught. He used his saber throw to keep Maul off balance, and unawares to Malgus's force-augmented kick into his face, breaking his nose. And before Maul could recover, suddenly, he would feel heat through his chest, a lightsaber through his heart, and Darth Malgus staring him in his eye, seething. And thus, I declare Darth Malgus, the cybernetic butcher, the victor. Of course, this is all my opinion. Please leave your thoughts and comments below. I know this fight was an extremely close one. I really went back and forth on who would win this exchange. What do you think? Do you agree Darth Malgus' combat experience would outweigh Darth Maul's immense training? Or do you think speed kills and Maul's abilities would cut through the infamous Malgus? Peace, love, and may the Force be with you. Always.